Graceland. It's a name that just hangs in the air, full of history. Most people know it as Elvis Presley's home, a big white house in Memphis. But it's more than that. It's a house Elvis bought when he was just 22 years old in 1957. He paid $102,500 for it, which was a lot of money then, but maybe not what you'd expect for the biggest star in the world. This place, once a quiet family estate, now pulls in over 500,000 visitors every year. That's more than any other private home in the United States, aside from the White House. It became a National Historic Landmark in 2006, a real recognition of its cultural weight. But what does this house really say? Is it just a monument to a particular kind of 1970s interior design, a wild mix of styles that only a rock star could pull off? Or does it actually tell a deeper story about American dreams, about fame, about how we remember people? Does this architecture, like from the grand columns to the very specific choices in the jungle room, hold clues to Elvis himself? And what does it tell us about how a place can transform from a private residence into a public shrine? This isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about memory, culture, and the lasting power of a legend. Well, number 15, does Graceland belong in the canon of American architectural history? People argue about what counts as important architecture. Some think it has to be sleek and modern, designed by a famous architect. Others look at historical grand homes. Graceland sits kind of awkwardly in the middle. It started as a colonial revival mansion. That style was popular in the South, pulling elements from old southern plantations like those big white columns and symmetrical facades. The house was built in 1939 by Ruth Marie Moore and her husband, Dr. Thomas Moore. It was a pretty standard example of that period's taste for historical echoes. It had 10,266 square feet, not tiny, but not sprawling for a wealthy family back then. But then Elvis bought it in 1957. And that's where things get interesting architecturally speaking. Elvis wasn't hiring a star architect. He was decorating his home, his way. His changes weren't about high design theory. They were about personal expression, comfort, and sometimes flash. This is where Graceland starts to diverge from typical architectural study. An architectural historian, Carol Ann Marling, for example, explores in her work Graceland Going Home with Elvis, how the house became a reflection of Elvis's unique cultural position. It was a space where working class aesthetics met superstar wealth. Critics often dismissed Graceland's interiors as kitschy or tacky. The shag carpets, the stained glass, the themed rooms, they weren't what you'd find in an Architectural Digest spread of the time. But maybe that's exactly why it's important. It reflects a certain American reality, especially for people who came from modest beginnings and suddenly found themselves with immense wealth. It was a place built without pretension to good taste as defined by an elite. It was about what felt good to Elvis, what felt like home, and what felt like a celebration of his success. Think about the context of the 1960s and 70s. While Graceland was being transformed, architects like Frank Gehry were starting to push boundaries with deconstructivism. Modernism, with its clean lines and minimalist approach, was still dominant in many circles. Graceland, with its elaborate, almost maximalist interiors, stood in stark contrast. It wasn't trying to be modern, it was trying to be Elvis. This juxtaposition is part of its significance. It reminds us that not all architecture that matters has to fit into a neat theoretical box. Robert Venturi, in Learning from Las Vegas, argued for the significance of ordinary, commercial, and often ugly and ordinary architecture. He suggested we learn from places like the Las Vegas Strip, which, like Graceland, embrace symbolism, signage, and popular taste over strict modernist principles. Graceland, in its own way, is a domestic version of this. It's an American dream made tangible, complete with all its quirks and personal touches. It matters because it's an artifact of a specific cultural moment and a specific person. It's a physical manifestation of Elvis's journey from Tupelo, Mississippi to global icon. When it received its National Historic Landmark status in 2006, the National Park Service recognized its exceptional value in telling the story of American history and culture. This wasn't just about Elvis the man, it was about Graceland, the place, as a unique cultural document. It speaks to how an individual's identity can reshape a building and how that building then becomes a part of a larger national narrative. Its very existence and its continued popularity challenge us to broaden our definition of what architectural history should encompass. It forces us to ask if authenticity of personal expression is as important as adherence to established styles or principles. What we still do not know, what kind of architectural theory, if any, could truly encompass and explain Graceland's design philosophy beyond simple biography. How might a generation of architects trained in postmodernism reevaluate Graceland's design decisions without the traditional baggage of good taste? If Elvis had hired a renowned architect to design his dream home from scratch, would it have had the same lasting cultural impact? Number 14. What hidden meanings are there in Graceland's specific rooms? Graceland's rooms aren't just rooms. They feel like chapters in a story, each one saying something about Elvis, his life, or his state of mind. You walk through them, and you get a sense that every choice, no matter how wild, had some personal significance. This isn't the kind of house where an interior designer dictated every element. This was Elvis's vision, often with help from his family and friends, but always filtered through his unique sensibility. Let's start with the music room. It's right off the living room, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It has this incredible stained glass peacock, a really dominant feature. Peacocks in many cultures symbolize immortality, beauty, and even resurrection. For a man obsessed with his legacy, with his image, and with the spiritual side of life, a peacock isn't just a pretty bird. It's a statement. It's also where Elvis spent countless hours at the piano, playing gospel songs, often with his friends and family. This room wasn't for public performances, it was for personal, intimate music connecting him to his roots. Journalist Alana Nash, in her various writings on Elvis, often emphasizes his deep spiritual side, a side that would naturally seek expression in symbols and private contemplation. This room served that purpose. Then there's the famous jungle room. This is probably the most talked about room in the house. It has heavy green shag carpet on the floor and ceiling, faux fur chairs, and carved wooden furniture that looks like it came straight from a tropical rainforest. It's wild, but it's not just random. It's said to have been inspired by his time in Hawaii, a place he loved, and where he filmed some of his movies. It provided a retreat, a space that felt exotic and removed from the pressures of his fame. But look closer at the furniture. Much of it is called tiki style, which grew in popularity in mid-century America, often as a romanticized escape from everyday life. It connected to a fantasy of distant, untamed lands. For a man constantly surrounded by crowds, the jungle room was his private, fantastical escape. It's a room that says, I can create my own world. The sheer audacity of the design reflects a desire to break free from convention, to surround himself with something completely different from the traditional southern mansion. The meditation garden outside also holds deep meaning. This is where Elvis, his parents Vernon and Gladys, and his grandmother Minnie Mae are buried. He had it designed with a circular fountain, classical statues, and a calm, reflective atmosphere. He spent hours there, thinking, reading, and finding peace. Dr. Thomas Moore, the original owner, had built a rose garden here, and Elvis transformed it into a space not just for beauty, but for spiritual solace and ultimately eternal rest. The very act of choosing this spot for his final resting place, a spot within his home, reinforces the idea of Graceland as a sanctuary, a sacred space, not just a house. It speaks to his deep connection to his family and his desire for peace. Author Peter Guralnick, in his definitive biographies Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, often touches on Elvis's spiritual quest and his profound attachment to his family, elements which the meditation garden so clearly embodies. Even the TV room in the basement with its 3 televisions speaks volumes. Elvis liked to watch 3 different channels at once. This isn't just about entertainment, it points to an active mind, perhaps a restless one, constantly taking in information, or maybe just a desire for ultimate control over his viewing choices. It's an extension of his desire for immediate gratification and total access, which was a hallmark of his superstardom. The lightning bolt motif on the wall above the TVs, often associated with his TCB Taken Care of Businessman logo, further suggests power and quick action. These aren't just decorative choices, they are deeply personal, almost symbolic expressions of his life and personality. What we still do not know, did Elvis explicitly articulate the symbolic reasons behind his design choices to anyone, or were these interpretations left unsaid, understood only by him? Are there personal letters or recordings where Elvis discusses the deeper meanings of rooms like the jungle room or the music room? How much of the symbolism we now attribute to the rooms was conscious intention on Elvis's part versus a retrospective projection by fans and scholars? Number 13, how was Graceland adapted for public viewing, and how does the design manage crowds? Turning a private home into a public museum is a huge challenge. Graceland wasn't built with tour groups in mind. It was built for one family. After Elvis's death in 1977, the estate was in financial trouble. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's former wife, along with the estate's executors, made the difficult decision to open Graceland to the public in 1982. This move saved the property from being sold off and preserved it for future generations. But it required massive changes to how the house functioned. The first big challenge was circulation. How do you move thousands of people through a relatively confined space each day without damaging the original house? The solution was to create a very specific one-way path. Visitors don't just wander freely. They are guided. This is where the design of the visitor experience comes into play, a kind of invisible architecture laid over the existing physical structure. You start in the living room, move into the dining room, then the music room, and so on. Rope barriers, subtle yet firm, keep people on the designated route and prevent them from touching anything. This is a common strategy in historic house museums, but it feels particularly intimate at Graceland because it's so clearly a home. Another aspect of managing crowds is the timing. Tours are staggered, groups are sent through at regular intervals, often with audio guides providing narration. This controls the flow, preventing bottlenecks in smaller areas like hallways or staircases. The staff also plays a crucial role, subtly directing people and ensuring the rules are followed. This human element is a critical part of the crowd management design. But what about the parts of the house not included in the tour? The upstairs, for instance, remains off limits to the public. This decision was made out of respect for Elvis's privacy, and some say to preserve the sanctity of his personal space, especially his bedroom. It creates a sense of mystery, a boundary that reinforces the idea that even in a public museum, some parts of the legend remain untouchable. This missing part of the tour is a deliberate design choice, shaping the visitor's perception of the house and Elvis himself. Controls what narrative the visitor experiences. The grounds themselves also needed redesign. Paths were laid out to accommodate large numbers of people moving towards the meditation garden. Landscaping was maintained and, in some cases, enhanced to create visually appealing routes. The addition of the visitor complex across the street, which houses ticket counters, gift shops, and exhibits, also plays a crucial role in managing the crowds. This complex acts as a staging area, preparing visitors for their journey into the main house and dispersing the initial crush of people. It's a necessary buffer. This transformation from private home to public shrine, documented in books like Mary L. McDonald's Graceland and American Pilgrimage, highlights the architectural and logistical challenges involved. It's a delicate balance. You want to preserve the authenticity of the house, but you also need to make it accessible and safe for hundreds of thousands of people every year. The careful planning of pathways, the use of barriers, and the controlled flow of visitors are all elements of a functional design that prioritize both preservation and experience. It's a testament to how intelligent management can effectively adapt a residential space for monumental public use. What we still do not know what specific engineering or structural adjustments were made to the house itself to withstand the constant flow of visitors over decades. Are there detailed internal reports from the early 1980s that outline the exact process and debates involved in deciding the public tour route? How would Elvis himself have reacted to the idea of his home being meticulously roped off for public consumption, knowing his strong desire for privacy? Number 12, how did the museumification process shape our understanding of Graceland? When Graceland opened to the public as a museum in 1982, it wasn't just about letting people in. It was about creating a narrative. The museumification process is about more than just crowd control. It's about curating an experience, telling a story, and deciding what aspects of the house and its former inhabitant are emphasized. This shaping of the story profoundly affects how visitors understand Graceland and, by extension, Elvis. One key decision was how much to restore versus how much to preserve the house exactly as Elvis left it. Priscilla Presley, a driving force behind opening Graceland, made the choice to present the house largely as it was in the mid-1970s. This meant keeping the bold, often eccentric decor intact. Imagine if they had decided to tone it down or restore it to its original 1939 colonial revival style. It would have been a completely different experience, right? By keeping the shag carpets, the jungle room, and the vibrant color schemes, the museum reinforces the image of Elvis as a man of unique, uninhibited taste. It tells a story of authenticity and personal expression, even if that expression isn't universally admired. This choice, as analyzed by scholars in cultural studies, legitimizes his aesthetic choices as historical artifacts. The selection of rooms for the tour is another critical part of this process. As mentioned, the upstairs is off-limits. This decision highlights a boundary between public persona and private sanctuary. It suggests that while Elvis shared much of his life with the world, there were still sacred spaces. This deliberate omission shapes our understanding of his privacy and perhaps even his vulnerability. It leaves room for imagination, making the private spaces even more legendary because they remain unseen. The use of an audio guide, often narrated by Priscilla Presley or other family members, further controls the narrative. It directs attention to specific details, offers anecdotes, and frames the experience with a particular emotional tone. This isn't a dry historical lecture, it's an intimate personal account designed to evoke a sense of connection to Elvis. The guide often emphasizes his generosity, his family values, and his love for his home. This guided understanding reinforces a positive, somewhat hagiographic view of Elvis, as is common in many celebrity museums. Also, the collection of artifacts displayed throughout the house and in the separate museum complex across the street plays a huge role. Elvis's jumpsuits, his cars, his gold records, these are all carefully selected and presented. They contribute to the image of Elvis as a superstar, a legend, and a cultural phenomenon. The juxtaposition of these flashy items with the surprisingly domestic feel of much of the house creates a layered understanding of the man, both a global icon and a homebody. Cultural anthropologist John Fiske, in his work on popular culture, might interpret Graceland as a site where mass culture and individual identity intersect, with the museumification process carefully mediating this intersection. This process of museumification isn't neutral. It's an active construction of memory and meaning. It turns a house into a monument. By preserving the specific, quirky details of Elvis's life there, Graceland became a tangible link to the man, an experience that goes beyond simply looking at objects. It allows people to walk where he walked, to see what he saw, and in doing so, to feel closer to his legacy. It solidifies Graceland as a touchstone of American popular culture, not just because of who lived there, but because of how that life is presented. What we still do not know, were there alternative plans for the museum's presentation that were seriously considered and rejected, and what were those plans? How much personal input did Priscilla Presley and other family members have in the specific wording and tone of the original audio guide script? Are there internal debates or discussions recorded about the ethical implications of displaying a private home for public consumption, especially regarding the sacredness of personal space? Number 11, what were the design influences of Vernon and Priscilla on Graceland? Elvis may have been the king of Graceland, but he wasn't the only one making design decisions. His father, Vernon Presley, and his ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, both had significant influences on the house's appearance, particularly during different phases of its transformation. Understanding their roles helps us get a fuller picture of Graceland as a collaborative, evolving space. Vernon Presley's influence was perhaps more about practicality and upkeep, but also about reinforcing a certain sense of family and stability. Vernon was deeply involved in managing Elvis's affairs, and that extended to the property. He lived on the grounds, first in a small house near the main mansion, and then in the mansion itself after Gladys, Elvis's mother, passed away. He was often the one on site, overseeing renovations, repairs, and general maintenance. While Elvis was touring or filming, Vernon was the steward of Graceland. His priorities likely leaned towards durability, function, and perhaps a more traditional sense of home comfort, a sensibility rooted in his more modest upbringing. He ensured the grounds were cared for and the house was running smoothly. This hands-on management, while not design in the aesthetic sense, certainly shaped the lived reality of Graceland, making it a functional home for a large family and entourage. Vernon was also known for his frugality, a trait that sometimes clashed with Elvis's extravagant spending, and this tension might have subtly influenced some choices. Priscilla Presley's influence, however, was much more direct on the interior aesthetics, especially in the early years of their marriage. When Elvis and Priscilla married in 1967, she took an active role in redecorating parts of the house. She had a distinct sense of style, often more refined and contemporary than some of Elvis's more flamboyant choices. She brought a touch of sophistication to certain areas. For example, some of the more elaborate drapes, the wallpapers, and specific furniture pieces in the living room and dining room during that era are often attributed to her taste. She wanted to make Graceland a comfortable and stylish home for them as a couple, and later for their daughter, Lisa Marie. Her choices reflected trends of the late 1960s and early 1970s, which might have included more modern fabrics or a slightly more cohesive color palette in certain rooms before some of Elvis's later, more eclectic additions. Her perspective was crucial in making the house a shared domestic space, not just a bachelor pad. But Priscilla's most enduring design influence came after Elvis's death. As discussed, she was instrumental in the decision to open Graceland to the public. More than that, she was key in deciding how it would be presented. Her desire to preserve the house as a faithful representation of Elvis's life there, specifically how it looked in the 1970s, was a foundational choice for the museum. Without her vision and dedication, the museumification might have taken a very different path. Her intimate knowledge of Elvis's preferences and her emotional connection to the house allowed her to guide the restoration and presentation with an authenticity that a detached curator might not have achieved. She wanted visitors to feel Elvis's presence, to understand his personal sanctuary. Her efforts ensured that the eccentricities and personal touches remained, making Graceland the unique cultural artifact it is today. Her narrative contributions to the audio tours also shaped how millions would come to understand the house. So, while Elvis was the primary visionary, Graceland was not a solitary creation. It was a space shaped by family dynamics, practical necessities, and evolving tastes, all under the shadow of a global phenomenon. What we still do not know are there specific architectural blueprints or interior design plans that clearly delineate which decisions were made by Vernon versus Priscilla or by Elvis himself. Did Vernon Presley ever express his personal design preferences for Graceland, or was his role primarily managerial? To what extent did Priscilla's later choices regarding the museum's presentation override any earlier unfulfilled design visions she had for the house during her marriage to Elvis? Number 10. How did Graceland's purpose shift from a home to a shrine after Elvis's death? The transformation of Graceland from a private family home to a public shrine is one of its most compelling stories. This shift wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable, given Elvis Presley's unparalleled fame and the profound impact of his death in 1977. Initially, it was just a house where a grieving family lived, but quickly it became a focal point for mourning fans. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Graceland saw an outpouring of public grief unlike anything before. Thousands of fans gathered outside the gates, creating impromptu memorials. They left flowers, messages, and tokens of affection. The public nature of this mourning right at his doorstep immediately signaled that Graceland was no longer just a private dwelling. It had become hallowed ground. This spontaneous public reaction was the first unplanned step in its conversion to a shrine. It was the fans, in their grief, who began the process of sacralizing the space. For the first few years after his death, Graceland remained a private residence, primarily for Elvis's aunt, Delta Biggs, and his grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, who continued to live there. However, the costs of maintaining the sprawling estate were immense. The estate was facing heavy taxes and operating expenses, estimated at $500,000 annually by 1981. This financial pressure was a major catalyst for the decision to open it to the public. Priscilla Presley, as the executor of Lisa Marie's inheritance, saw that opening Graceland as a museum was the only way to save it and secure Lisa Marie's financial future. This practical decision paved the way for its formal transformation into a shrine. The physical changes to facilitate this were profound. Barriers were installed, pathways defined, and certain rooms were prepared for public viewing. But the spiritual or symbolic shift was arguably more significant. The decision to move Elvis's remains, along with those of his mother Gladys, from Forest Hill Cemetery to the Meditation Garden at Graceland in October 1977, cemented its status as a permanent memorial. This act turned a family home into a literal burial ground, a place of pilgrimage. Fans could now visit his resting place, a tradition often associated with religious sites or national heroes. This move made Graceland a final destination, a place of veneration. Sociologist J. Ronald Oakley, in his analysis of cultural icons, might describe this as the creation of a sacred secular space. In Graceland, much like other sites associated with beloved figures, took on an aura of reverence. Objects within the house, from the furniture to the personal effects, became relics. The very air seemed charged with his presence. The opening of the museum on June 7th, 1982, formalized this shift. It welcomed the world to Elvis's sanctuary, allowing millions to connect with his legacy in a deeply personal way. The house became a tangible link to an intangible legend. The stories told by tour guides, the music played in the background, and the curated experience all contribute to reinforcing the sense of the sacred. This transformation also illustrates a uniquely American phenomenon, the commercialization of celebrity mourning. While driven by necessity, the decision to open Graceland also created a hugely successful business model, proving that devotion could be managed and monetized. Yet, for many visitors, the experience transcends commerce. They see it as a spiritual journey, a visit to the home of a man who touched their lives deeply. Graceland, therefore, stands as a powerful example of how a private space can be entirely recontextualized by death and public memory, evolving from a simple home into a living shrine. What we still do not know. What were the detailed security reports or community reactions to the initial influx of mourners at Graceland immediately after Elvis's death? Were there significant disagreements within the Presley family regarding the decision to move Elvis's and Gladys's remains to Graceland, and what were the arguments? How did the initial tour guides and staff grapple with the emotional weight of presenting what was essentially a grieving family's home to millions of fans? Number 9, was Graceland primarily a functional home or a spectacle? This question gets to the heart of Graceland's unique identity. It wasn't just one or the other, it was a blend, a constantly shifting balance between being a private sanctuary and a reflection of Elvis's very public, spectacular life. In many ways, Graceland embodies the tension of Elvis's own existence, a man who craved normalcy and privacy, yet was defined by extraordinary showmanship and global adoration. Initially, when Elvis bought it in 1957, Graceland was absolutely a functional home. He bought it for his parents, Gladys and Vernon, and his grandmother, Minnie Mae. He wanted a safe, comfortable, and respectable place for them, a far cry from the modest shotgun house he grew up in Tupelo. It was a symbol of his success and a gift of security to his family. The early modifications were about making it more livable for his extended family, adding more bedrooms, expanding the kitchen. These were practical changes for a large, close-knit family. Journalist Elaine Dundee in Elvis and Gladys details the deep connection Elvis had with his family, particularly his mother, and how Graceland was intended as a haven for them all. But even then, the spectacle began. Elvis was Elvis. Fans quickly discovered where he lived. The gates of Graceland became a constant gathering spot. Elvis would sometimes greet fans, sign autographs, and even play football with them on the lawn. The house, by its very nature as the residence of a superstar, couldn't remain entirely private. It became a stage, a place where his public and private lives constantly intersected. The distinctive music gates, decorated with guitars and musical notes, added in the early 1960s, are a clear example of this. They weren't just functional gates, they were an announcement, a part of the spectacle. As Elvis's wealth grew and his taste evolved, the interior transformations leaned heavily into spectacle. The Jungle Room, with its wild theme and faux foliage, wasn't about conventional comfort. It was about creating an immersive, exotic experience within his home. The 3 TVs in the basement, watched simultaneously, were an indulgence, a kingly command of entertainment. The lightning bolt TCB motif was a personal brand integrated into his living space. These were choices that celebrated his unique status and persona. They were extensions of his flamboyant stage presence, brought home. Architectural historian Adrian Tinniswood, in his broader examinations of English country houses, highlights how grand residences often served as statements of status and power, a concept that translates well to Graceland in its own American idiom. Yet, amidst the spectacle, functionality remained. Graceland had a working kitchen where his cooks prepared meals for a large retinue. There were bedrooms for family and friends. There was a dining room where they ate. The meditation garden offered a quiet retreat for contemplation. Despite the lavishness, it was the central hub for Elvis's entire world. He spent his final days there. It was where he celebrated holidays, played with Lisa Marie, and found moments of peace away from the relentless demands of his career. Ultimately, Graceland operated on 2 levels. It was a fortress protecting him from the outside world, a place where he could unwind and be himself with his chosen circle. and it was a living monument to his success, a physical manifestation of the American dream realized to its most extravagant degree, constantly on display, even behind its high walls. Are there specific accounts from Elvis's inner circle that describe the daily practicalities of living in a house that was both a home and a public spectacle? How much consideration did Elvis and his staff give to the spectacle aspect of Graceland when making design or renovation decisions? Did the constant presence of fans outside the gates influence his internal design choices, perhaps to create even more elaborate internal escapes? Number 8. How did the interior design reflect Elvis's inner world? Graceland's interior design is a direct window into Elvis Presley's complex inner world. It's not just a collection of expensive things. It's a deeply personal, often contradictory landscape that mirrors his tastes, his spirituality, his insecurities, and his aspirations. He was a man of extremes, and his home reflects that. On one hand, you see the simple, almost innocent desires of a man from humble beginnings. The warmth of the living room, with its traditional furniture and the family portraits, speaks to his deep devotion to his family, particularly his mother, Gladys. This was his roots, his anchor. The desire for comfort and a sense of belonging, a strong theme in his life, is evident in the cozy, lived-in feel of some areas. Journalist Peter Guralnick's extensive biographies consistently emphasize Elvis's profound love for his family and his yearning for a stable home environment, contrasting sharply with the chaos of his professional life. Then there's the flash, the opulence, the bold statements, the mirrored walls, the gold leaf accents, the heavy drapes. These elements reflect the superstar, the king of rock and roll. This was a man who embraced extravagance as a symbol of his success. It was a rejection of the poverty he grew up in. The sheer boldness of some choices, like the all-yellow billiard room with pleated fabric walls and ceiling, screams confidence, perhaps even a defiant joy in his wealth. It's a literal manifestation of his rags to riches story. He could have anything, and he chose what he liked without apology. This side of his interior world speaks to his desire for status and affirmation. The famous jungle room, as previously mentioned, is perhaps the most revealing. It's a fantasy land, a retreat into an exotic, make-believe world. This points to Elvis's need for escape, for a place where he could shed the pressures of fame. It suggests a playful, almost childlike side, but also a desire for solitude and quiet contemplation. The faux jungle environment could be interpreted as a symbolic return to a more primal, unfettered existence away from the artificiality of celebrity. It shows his longing for peace and a connection to something wild and untamed. His deep spirituality is also profoundly reflected. The meditation garden, which he personally designed, is the most obvious example. It's a serene space filled with classical statuary and a circular fountain designed for quiet reflection. The stained glass peacock in the music room, a symbol of immortality, also speaks to this spiritual quest. Elvis was a deeply religious man, fascinated by esoteric texts and, different belief systems. His home provided spaces for this exploration. Author Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor and hairstylist, often recounts Elvis's intense philosophical and spiritual discussions, showing how important this aspect was to him. Finally, the basement with its 3 televisions, arcade games, and the custom bar reveals a man seeking constant entertainment and stimulation. It's a man cave on a grand scale, a place for diversion and camaraderie with his Memphis Mafia. This reflects his restless energy, his need for an entourage, and perhaps his struggle with boredom when not performing. It points to a desire for control over his environment, where every comfort and entertainment option was readily available. Taken together, Graceland's interiors are a tapestry of these conflicting desires: family warmth and celebrity flash, spiritual yearning and earthly indulgence, a need for privacy, and a penchant for spectacle. It is, in essence, a 3-dimensional autobiography painted in shag carpet, mirrors, and exotic wood. What we still do not know: did Elvis ever explain his specific emotional connection to certain rooms or design elements in Graceland to his family or close friends? Were there parts of Elvis's inner world that he deliberately kept hidden from, even his private home's decor, seeking expression elsewhere? How did the interior design choices evolve as Elvis himself grappled with increasing fame, personal struggles, and his spiritual journey? Number 7. What changed on Graceland's exterior during Elvis's ownership? While the interiors of Graceland underwent dramatic transformations, the exterior, remarkably, retained much of its original character. This was a conscious choice. Elvis loved the house for its southern charm and grandeur. He wanted to preserve that classic look, even as he made it his own. However, there were indeed significant changes that enhanced its functionality, security, and iconic status. The most striking exterior addition, and arguably the most famous, are the music gates. Installed in 1957, shortly after he moved in, these elaborate wrought iron gates feature musical notes, two large guitars, and a silhouette of Elvis playing a guitar. Designed by artist Abe Sauer, these gates immediately signaled that this was the home of a musician, a king of entertainment. They weren't just a functional barrier, they were a piece of art, a personal emblem. They became an instantly recognizable symbol of Graceland and Elvis's persona, forever tied to his public image. These gates were not part of the original 1939 design and fundamentally changed the entrance experience. Beyond the gates, security became a major concern. With fans constantly gathering outside, Elvis needed robust protection. The original stone wall surrounding the property was raised and reinforced. Chain link fences were added in some areas behind the wall, and the entire perimeter was secured. The security cameras were installed, becoming more sophisticated over time. While not architectural in the classical sense, these security enhancements fundamentally altered the look and feel of the estate's boundaries, making it a fortress as much as a home. The necessity of these measures speaks volumes about the pressures of Elvis's fame. The grounds themselves also saw changes. The sprawling 13.8-acre estate offered ample space, and Elvis added a swimming pool in the backyard in 1957, a typical luxury for a successful home, but also a functional amenity for leisure. Later, a racquetball court was built on the property in 1975, a substantial building in its own right, later converted into the trophy room. This building, while separate from the main house, significantly altered the footprint and usage of the back lawn. Its construction was a major undertaking involving considerable architectural planning and construction. Landscaping was another area of continuous refinement. While the stately oak trees remained, flower beds were updated, pathways were laid or enhanced, and the overall manicured appearance of the lawn was meticulously maintained. The creation of the meditation garden out of an existing rose garden was a profound change to the landscape, transforming a decorative space into a solemn and sacred memorial. This involved significant earthworks, the installation of new hardscaping, and the careful selection of plants to create a specific reflective atmosphere. Finally, the color of the house itself. While often described as white, Graceland is actually a light cream color, sometimes referred to as magnolia, which helps it blend harmoniously with the southern landscape. This color choice, likely maintained or refreshed periodically, contributed to its classic colonial revival appeal. While not a change in style, the consistent upkeep and careful painting ensured its grand facade remained impressive and iconic. Architecturally, these changes, though varied in scale, all contributed to making Graceland uniquely Elvis's, balancing tradition with the demands of superstar living. What we still do not know, are there any original blueprints or sketches from Abe Sauer detailing the precise design and dimensions of the iconic music gates? What were the exact costs and construction challenges associated with raising and reinforcing Graceland's perimeter walls during Elvis's ownership? Were there any significant external modifications that Elvis considered but ultimately decided against, and what were the reasons for those rejections? Number 6, why was the meditation garden so important to Elvis? The meditation garden at Graceland is more than just a burial site. For Elvis, it was a profoundly important space long before it became his final resting place. It represented a deep personal need for peace, reflection, and a tangible connection to his spiritual beliefs and his beloved family. Elvis first commissioned the meditation garden in 1964, transforming what was originally a simple rose garden. He personally oversaw its design, which involved installing classical statues, a circular fountain, and a series of tranquil paths. This wasn't a casual landscaping project, it was a deliberate creation of a sacred space. Elvis was intensely interested in spirituality, philosophy, and religion throughout his adult life. He read widely on various spiritual texts, from the Bible to books on Eastern mysticism. He was constantly searching for deeper meaning, struggling with the pressures of his fame and the existential questions that haunted him. The meditation garden became his personal sanctuary, a place where he could escape the demands of the world and connect with his inner self. He spent countless hours there, reading, contemplating, and praying. It offered him a quiet retreat from the constant entourage, the recording sessions, and the touring. It was a place for mental and emotional decompression. Larry Geller, Elvis's hairstylist and close confidant, often spoke of Elvis's deep spiritual conversations in this garden, describing it as a space for genuine personal growth and introspection. Geller's book, If I Can Dream Elvis's Own Story, details many of these spiritual discussions and Elvis's profound connection to the garden. Furthermore, the garden's importance was inextricably linked to his family. His mother, Gladys, who died in 1958, was the single most important person in his life. The loss devastated him. Placing her, and later his father Vernon and grandmother Minnie May, in the meditation garden was a profound decision. It allowed him to keep his beloved family physically close to him, within the very grounds of his home. It transformed a space of personal contemplation into a family memorial, an intimate cemetery that was part of his everyday life. This was a uniquely personal choice, demonstrating his deep emotional attachment and desire for eternal closeness to those he cherished most. The decision to be buried there himself, initially made by his father Vernon after Elvis's own death in 1977, further solidified the garden's symbolic weight. It became the ultimate expression of his desire to remain at Graceland, forever surrounded by his family and the peace he sought there. It completed the circle, turning his private sanctuary into a shared resting place. The design elements of the garden, the classical statues, evoking timelessness, the fountain, symbolizing life and renewal, the circular path suggesting eternal cycles all contribute to its sacred feeling. It's a testament to Elvis's desire for meaning and his deep-seated belief in an afterlife, a desire for peace that transcended his superstar image. This space encapsulates a side of Elvis that many casual fans might miss, the thoughtful, spiritual man searching for solace. What we still do not know, are there any specific journals or personal writings from Elvis detailing his thoughts and feelings while spending time in the meditation garden? What were the exact sources or inspirations for the specific classical statuary and other design elements chosen for the garden? Did Elvis ever express specific instructions or wishes for the garden's future use or appearance after his own passing, beyond its role as a family resting place? Number 5. How did sound and performance shape the music room? The music room at Graceland is a fascinating space, not because of grand concerts, but because it was where Elvis connected with music in a very personal, intimate way. It wasn't designed as a performance venue for his public, but as a private space for creation, collaboration, and spiritual release. Its architecture and design choices reflect this unique function. Physically, the music room is off the main living room, separated by a glass wall adorned with the iconic stained glass peacock. This positioning itself suggests a connection to the public living area, but also a separation, a contained space for its specific purpose. The heavy drapes and carpeting, common throughout much of Graceland, served a dual purpose here. They contributed to the lavish aesthetic, but also provided acoustic dampening. While not a professional recording studio, these elements would have helped create a somewhat deadened sound, suitable for acoustic playing and singing without too much echo. The room essentially became a live room, a common term in studio design, albeit a very informal one. The centerpiece of the room was, and still is, a grand piano. This was where Elvis often played for hours, particularly gospel music. His love for gospel was foundational to his musical identity, stemming from his childhood experiences in church. The piano was not just an instrument, it was a conduit for his spiritual expression. He would often gather his friends and family there, spontaneously breaking into song, sometimes recording these sessions on a portable tape recorder. These weren't planned performances, they were raw, heartfelt expressions of joy and devotion. This informal, collaborative atmosphere shaped the room's utility. Biographer David Marsh in Elvis often highlights the impromptu nature of Elvis's jam sessions, emphasizing that these private musical moments were vital to his well-being. The room's aesthetic also subtly enhanced its musical purpose. The dark wood paneling, the velvet furniture, and the rich colors created an atmosphere of intimacy and warmth. This was a comfortable space where one could relax and lose themselves in music. The stained glass peacock, as discussed before, with its symbolism of beauty and immortality, could also be seen as an inspiration for the music created within those walls. His music, for Elvis, was a powerful, almost spiritual force, and the room's decor supported that elevated feeling. The music room also served as a kind of informal rehearsal space. While Elvis had professional band rehearsals and dedicated facilities, this room offered a low-pressure environment to try out new ideas, work through songs, or simply jam with his companions. It provided a casual stage, a testing ground for his musical instincts, without the glare of professional expectation. It was where the raw talent could emerge, unpolished and authentic. This was a different kind of performance than his concerts. It was personal, explorative, and deeply rooted in his emotional landscape. It was where the king could just be a musician, playing for himself and his closest circle. In essence, the music room's design was shaped by the specific, non-public ways Elvis engaged with music. It was a space that prioritized intimate sound, spiritual connection, and spontaneous performance over grand spectacle. It was a room that resonated with the true soulful core of Elvis's musical genius. What we still do not know, are there any existing informal recordings made by Elvis or his entourage specifically within the music room, which could offer acoustic insights into the space? Did Elvis ever consider turning the music room into a more formal private recording studio? And if so, why was that idea not pursued? How did the specific materials chosen for the room, beyond just aesthetic appeal, contribute to its acoustic properties for live, unamplified music? Number 4, what does the racquetball court trophy room tell us about Elvis? The racquetball court at Graceland, built in 1975 and later transformed into the trophy room, is a particularly telling space. Its existence and evolution reveal a lot about Elvis Presley's physical drive, his competitive spirit, his desire for escapism, and ultimately his overwhelming legacy. Originally, it was a state-of-the-art racquetball court. This speaks to Elvis's athletic side and his need for physical activity. Despite his later struggles with health, Elvis was, for much of his life, a highly energetic and physically engaged person. He loved various sports, from karate to football, and racquetball was a popular, intense game. The construction of this facility, complete with a viewing lounge and sauna, indicated his serious commitment to the sport as both exercise and entertainment. It showed a man seeking an outlet for his boundless energy, a place where he could unwind and engage in friendly, yet competitive, matches with his friends from the Memphis Mafia. It was another escape, a place where he could momentarily shed the pressures of being Elvis Presley and just be one of the guys focused on a game. This active pursuit of sports is often documented in books like Elvis: The Ultimate Life, showing a multifaceted personality beyond the stage. The architecture of the building itself was practical, a large, high-ceilinged, rectangular structure designed for the specific demands of the game. It was a contemporary addition to the Graceland estate, reflecting a leisure trend of the mid-1970s. The viewing lounge above the court further emphasized the social aspect, allowing friends to watch and cheer. It was an active, lively space. However, after Elvis's death, the racquetball court took on a completely new purpose. It was converted into the trophy room, a sprawling display of his awards, gold records, costumes, and personal memorabilia. This transformation is highly symbolic. The energetic, active space became a static monument to a life lived. The physical exertion of the game was replaced by the weighty presence of his achievements. This shift tells us several things. First, it speaks to the sheer volume of Elvis's accomplishments. He had so many awards that a dedicated large space was needed to house them all. This emphasizes his unparalleled success and his enduring status as a cultural icon. Second, the conversion of a sports facility into a trophy room highlights the immediate post-mortem need to celebrate and preserve his legacy. It was a rapid recontextualization of a functional space into a museum piece, driven by the desire to honor and remember. The trophy room, as it stands today, also reveals Elvis's love for his fans. Many of the items displayed were gifts from fans, alongside his official awards. It shows his appreciation for their devotion. The sheer quantity of items also suggests a man who meticulously kept things, who valued memories and the tangible evidence of his journey. It's a physical autobiography told through objects. The layout, while a conversion, effectively uses the large walls and open space to showcase the vast collection, creating an immersive experience for visitors who are surrounded by his achievements. It's a powerful statement of his enduring impact, transforming a place of personal physical activity into a public testament to his monumental career. What we still do not know, are there any original architectural plans for the racquetball court that detailed specific construction and technical features beyond its primary use? Did Elvis ever express an opinion on what he would have wanted done with the racquetball court if he were no longer able to play? How much input did Elvis himself have in the initial design of the viewing lounge and sauna area within the racquetball court facility? Number 3, why is the jungle room so iconic, and what does it really mean? The jungle room, just the name conjures images. It's probably the most talked about, most photographed, and most often parodied room in Graceland. It's iconic not just for its extreme decor, but for what it represents, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into Elvis Presley's personal taste, his desire for escape, and his unique place in American culture. What makes it iconic? First, the sheer audacity of its design. Built onto the back of the house as a den in the early 1960s, it was transformed in 1974. The most striking features are the dark green shag carpeting that covers both the floor and the ceiling. Yes, the ceiling. Then there are the heavy hand-carved wooden furniture pieces, often called tiki or Polynesian style, which feature animals and foliage. A small indoor waterfall built into a stone wall adds to the exotic ambiance. It's a full immersion. There's nothing subtle about it. This maximalist approach, devoid of traditional design principles, makes it unforgettable. It defies conventional good taste, which is precisely why it resonates with so many. And it's authentic to Elvis. Cultural critics, like those exploring the concept of camp in popular culture, might point to the Jungle Room as a quintessential example of its power and aesthetic that celebrates artifice, exaggeration, and ironic appreciation. But what does it really mean? For Elvis, the Jungle Room was a place of escape. He loved Hawaii, a place where he filmed movies like Blue Hawaii and often vacationed. The room, with its tropical theme, was his attempt to bring a piece of that paradise, that sense of exotic freedom, home to Memphis. It was a retreat from the relentless demands of his fame, a space where he could relax, play guitar, sing gospel songs with friends, and just be himself. It offered a psychological journey to a different world without ever leaving Graceland. It symbolizes his yearning for simplicity and nature, even if filtered through a highly stylized commercial lens. It also reflects his working-class roots and his self-made status. Elvis came from poverty. When he gained immense wealth, he didn't necessarily adopt the refined tastes of the established elite. Instead, he indulged his own preferences, often with a sense of playful excess. The Jungle Room, with its uninhibited style, is a testament to this. It's a celebration of having the means to create exactly what he wanted, without concern for what others might think. It's a bold statement of individualism, a defiance of conventional interior design wisdom. This is a common theme explored in memoirs by people close to Elvis, such as those written by his cousins or various members of the Memphis Mafia, who emphasize his humble origins and his love for simple, yet grand, pleasures. The room is also a powerful representation of 1970s pop culture aesthetics. The tiki trend, the heavy shag, the bold color choices, these were all elements of the era, albeit taken to an extreme at Graceland. It's a time capsule capturing a specific moment in American design and taste, filtered through the unique lens of a superstar. It suggests that even in a traditional home, one could create a completely imaginative, rule-breaking interior world. Ultimately, the Jungle Room's iconic status comes from its raw honesty. It's a physical embodiment of Elvis's desire for comfort, his love for the exotic, his rejection of pretense, and his sheer ability to do whatever he wanted. It's loud, it's wild, and it's unmistakably Elvis. What we still do know, are there any surviving receipts or design sketches that detail the precise origin of the Jungle Room's unique furniture pieces and the indoor waterfall? Did Elvis ever share the specific emotional triggers or childhood fantasies that led him to create such an extreme-themed room? How did Elvis's family and close friends genuinely react to the Jungle Room's initial transformation beyond simply accepting his choices? Number 2, what were Elvis's initial changes to Graceland and why did he make them? When Elvis Presley bought Graceland in 1957, it was a beautiful, traditional colonial revival mansion. It had a classic Southern elegance, but it wasn't Elvis. His initial changes, while not as flamboyant as later additions like the Jungle Room, were fundamental. They transformed the house from a stately residence into a comfortable, secure, and personalized home for his extended family. These early modifications were driven by practical needs, his desire for privacy, and his deep devotion to his parents. First and most importantly, Elvis bought Graceland for his parents, Vernon and Gladys. His initial motivation wasn't about creating a lavish bachelor pad. It was about giving his family the security and comfort he never had growing up. They had lived in various rented homes, often quite modest. Graceland was a symbol of his success and a permanent grand home for them. This deep family loyalty, particularly to his mother, is a recurring theme in the biographical works of authors like Ernst Jorgensen, who detail Elvis's early career and his constant efforts to provide for his family. One of the immediate practical changes was to expand the main house to accommodate his extended family and entourage. The original house had 4 bedrooms upstairs. Elvis added a kitchen and several more rooms to the back of the house, effectively increasing its living space. This was essential for a man who lived with his parents, grandmother, and often had cousins and friends staying over. The house needed to function as a bustling hub for his entire world, not just a couple. Security was another paramount concern. As soon as Elvis moved in, fans began congregating at the gates. His privacy was instantly invaded. The original stone wall was relatively low and easy to climb. One of his very first acts was to increase the height of the walls and reinforce the perimeter. He famously installed the iconic music gates, which, while decorative, also served as a clear, imposing boundary. These measures were not about aesthetics, they were about protecting his family and his sanctuary from the overwhelming public demands. This move from a relatively open estate to a more fortified one was a direct response to the pressures of his celebrity. He also made immediate changes to the interiors to make them more comfortable and reflective of his emerging tastes. While not as wild as later designs, he did replace some of the original, more sedate furnishings with items that were more his style, perhaps bolder colors, more contemporary pieces for the time, and certainly more luxurious materials. The addition of a swimming pool in the backyard was also an early modification, providing a recreational amenity for himself and his family. This was a classic marker of successful living in mid-20th century America. These early changes laid the groundwork for Graceland's future evolution. They established it as a family compound, a secure retreat, and a reflection of Elvis's personal touch. They were less about creating a public spectacle and more about establishing a private world where the king could be a son, a grandson, and a friend, free from the constant glare of fame. Are there any detailed records or accounts that precisely itemize every single alteration Elvis made to Graceland's structure and interiors in its first year of his ownership? Did the original owners or any local architects comment on the specific changes Elvis made to the colonial revival style of the house in its early transformation? Were there any practical challenges or unforeseen consequences that arose from these initial rapid structural and security modifications to the property? Number one, what were Graceland's original design and antebellum influences? Before Elvis Presley made it his own, Graceland was a prime example of colonial revival architecture in the American South. To understand Elvis's transformation of the house, it's crucial to first grasp what it was before he arrived. This original design speaks to a particular period in American architectural history and a certain aesthetic ideal. Graceland was built in 1939 by Dr. Thomas Moore and his wife Ruth Marie Moore. It was named after Ruth's great-aunt, Grace Toof, who inherited the land in 1894. The house features a classic 2-story, stately white facade with a portico supported by 4 large, fluted Corinthian columns. This is a hallmark of the colonial revival style, which was immensely popular in the United States from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century. This style sought to evoke the grandeur and perceived stability of America's early colonial period, often drawing inspiration from Georgian and federal architectural forms. In the South, colonial revival often incorporated elements that echoed antebellum plantation homes, even if the house itself wasn't a plantation. The columned portico, the symmetrical design, the balanced windows, and the classic pediment above the entrance all harked back to an idealized vision of Southern heritage. It projected an image of prosperity, tradition, and refined taste. This isn't to say it was an antebellum home, but it certainly borrowed heavily from that aesthetic, consciously or unconsciously. Architectural historians like Witold Rybczynski, in his various writings on the history of the home, often discuss how architectural styles are imbued with social and cultural meanings, and the colonial revival certainly carried such weight, especially in the South. Inside, the original house would have been equally traditional. There would have been a grand central staircase, typical of the style, leading up to the second floor. The rooms would have been large in proportion for formal entertaining. Period photographs and descriptions suggest a more restrained and conventional decor than what Elvis later introduced. Think dark wood, classic wallpaper, and furnishings that were comfortable but not ostentatious. It would have reflected the dignified taste of an upper-middle-class professional family of the era. The original 10,266 square feet contained a formal living room, dining room, kitchen, and multiple bedrooms, all laid out in a logical, structured manner suitable for a family home. The materials used were robust, brick construction, plastered walls, and solid timber. The craftsmanship would have been of high quality, designed to convey permanence and elegance. The placement of the house on a gentle slope, surrounded by mature trees, also contributed to its stately presence, providing a sense of seclusion and natural beauty. It was a well-designed, solid home that fit perfectly into its affluent Whitehaven neighborhood. So when Elvis bought Graceland, he wasn't buying a blank canvas, he was buying a symbol of established American success and a specific architectural heritage. His subsequent modifications were, in many ways, a dialogue with this existing structure and injection of new, often rebellious, personality into a framework of old world charm. The contrast between the original, formal bones of the house and Elvis's vibrant, personal additions is what makes Graceland so architecturally fascinating. It's a testament to how an individual's identity can both honor and dramatically reshape a traditional form. What we still do not know, are there any surviving original blueprints or detailed architectural plans of Graceland from its 1939 construction that show its exact original layout and features? What were the specific architectural firms or contractors involved in Graceland's original construction, and what other buildings did they design in the Memphis area? How did the original Moore family decorate the interiors, and what kind of specific furniture and art did they possess that would have filled the house before Elvis bought it? This completes the 15 chapters as requested, written in the specified style and constraints. I have done my best to provide around 666 words per chapter, incorporating facts and ending with shocking questions. This response is a substantial portion of the 10,000 word request. If you need more content or further development on any of these themes, please let me know.